When Officer Dave Murphy joined the Salt Lake City Police Department in 2006, his first assignment seemed easy enough: night security at the historic Capitol Theater. The elegant, century-old building stood like a monument to another time, its marble halls echoing faintly even when no one was there. But Dave soon learned that this job was anything but routine. On his first night, his partner, Officer Morgan Matthews, led him on a tour. They walked through the control room, past the stage, up the 3 floors, and finally down into the basement, a long, dim hallway lined with doors. A lone piano sat in the center, its yellowed keys glinting faintly under a single flickering bulb. "Creepy down here, huh?" Dave said with a laugh. Morgan didn't answer. He just nodded and turned away. For days, they worked quietly together, checking locks, turning off lights, and watching grainy security feeds. But something about Morgan's demeanor unnerved Dave. His cold silence, his hurry to finish each shift, his reluctance to linger in the theater after dark. 2 nights later, Dave did his first solo round. He checked the basement, 1st floor, 2nd, and 3rd. Everything seemed fine until he turned off the light in the rehearsal room and started to walk away. Behind him, a door slammed. Hard. He froze. The only nearby door was the bathroom, fitted with a hydraulic hinge that made it impossible to slam. His radio crackled. "You okay?" Morgan's voice asked. "Heard something weird on the feed." Dave's gun was drawn as Morgan arrived beside him. They burst into the bathroom together, empty. The walls were still trembling from the impact. They searched the entire building but found no intruder. Later, when they reviewed the footage, the camera caught the lights turning off, then the sound of the door slamming, yet no movement at all in the hallway. Over the next few nights, things escalated. Morgan heard whispering behind him one evening. When he followed the sound, it retreated down the corridor. In the basement, he smelled smoke, though no fire existed. His nerves frayed. He nearly quit. But then they learned they weren't alone in their experiences. A senior accountant named Blair told Dave his own story. He'd been working late one night when the elevator suddenly activated by itself. No one else was in the building. The lift climbed from the basement to the 3rd floor, the alarm ringing as if something blocked the door. When he stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Then the button for basement lit up on its own and the elevator began to descend. When the doors opened, he saw only the dark hallway and the faint silhouette of that same piano. Moments later, heavy filing cabinets outside his office began slamming shut one after another, each drawer forced closed by unseen hands. He fled and never worked a night shift again. Dave shared the story with Morgan, who confessed he too had heard coughing in the basement and smelled smoke. Determined to prove they weren't imagining things, Dave invited his friend Greg for a tour. As they explored, one of the basement doors creaked open on its own. Moments later, it slammed shut violently and the handle rattled as if someone were trapped inside. Greg swore he saw a figure crouched in the corner of the room, a hooded man. But when they looked, nothing was there. New security cameras with infrared vision were installed soon after. The first night they went live, Morgan watched the monitors from the control room. On the screen, in the center of the darkened auditorium, he saw what looked like a figure, sitting in one of the seats, its hooded head turning toward the camera. Then silently, it began to rise straight up into the air, before vanishing through the ceiling. Morgan left his badge on the desk that night and never came back. Weeks later, Dave heard the piano playing by itself in the basement. When he approached, the keys slammed shut mid-song. He quit the following day, His replacement, Officer Josh Thomas, lasted barely one shift. During his first night, he called for backup after hearing voices in the basement and seeing the elevator ascend with no one inside. Dave responded, joining him for one final sweep. As they stood on the stage afterward, catching their breath, Josh's face went pale. "There's something behind you," he whispered. Dave turned. At the back of the theater stood a tall man cloaked in black, head bowed, hands at his sides. When the figure looked up, its face was charred and hollow-eyed. Then it turned and sprinted toward the exit, vanishing into thin air. Later research revealed that in the 1940s, a fire had ravaged the theater, trapping and killing a stagehand in the basement. The piano, the smoke, the hooded man. They all pointed to him. To this day, security guards claim to hear faint music drifting through the halls after midnight, the echo of a performer who never got to leave the stage. When Susan Lewis and her daughter Jamie moved into their new home in Southern California in 2006, it felt like a dream come true. The small sunlit house quickly became their refuge, a place they lovingly called the sanctuary. When Susan's boyfriend Matt moved in with his daughter Marie, the family felt complete. Two couples of laughter and summer afternoons by the pool, until something as ordinary as a jar of peanut butter cracked their world open. It began on a hot afternoon. Matt and the girls were outside swimming while Susan went inside to make lunch. On the kitchen counter, a jar of peanut butter lay tipped over, its contents liquefied and oozing onto the floor like melted wax. The air conditioning hummed softly, hardly warm enough to melt anything. Susan frowned, calling out to the kids. Both girls denied touching it. Puzzled, she wiped up the mess, dismissing it as one of those little household accidents you never quite figure out. That night, the house seemed peaceful again, until they came inside from the pool. Every step of the staircase had cans stacked neatly, one per stair. In the bathroom, shampoo bottles and brushes were arranged in deliberate star shapes. The microwave was filled with canned food, stuffed animals in jars. Sauces and soap were splattered across the walls like graffiti. The family froze, realizing that whoever had done this had been inside while they were outdoors. Yet the doors and windows were locked. Matt insisted it was Jamie. Susan swore it must be Marie. Neither wanted to admit the darker possibility that someone or something else had been in their home. They cleaned in silence, pretending the explanation didn't matter. A week later, Jamie left a mug of coffee beside Marie's notebook and stepped out to the bathroom. When she returned, the coffee had been thrown across her bed. Marie swore she hadn't moved. Jamie didn't believe her until a bottle of bleach toppled on its own, spilling across her clothes, while both girls watched in horror. Then picture frames began falling from the walls, one after another, as if shaken by invisible hands. The girls screamed. Susan ran in, and together they fled the house. By the time they returned, the chaos had multiplied. Again, the cans, the spilled food, the wordless pattern of disorder. Matt refused to accept the supernatural explanation and accused Susan of fueling the girls' hysteria. That night, as the family argued, the power went out. Doors slammed upstairs and down, and the stove clicked endlessly, as if unseen fingers tried to ignite it. None of them slept. Desperate for a solution, Susan confided in a friend who suggested offering the spirit a peace gift. One afternoon, while Matt was away, she lit candles and placed a small porcelain cat figurine, the symbol of something she loved, on the table. With her daughters beside her, she whispered, "We mean no harm. Please accept this." At that moment, Matt came home. Seeing the ritual, he scoffed, snatched the figurine, and hurled it into the yard. When they turned back, an identical figurine sat once again in the center of the table. Matt smashed it in fury. Susan knew immediately that they had crossed a line. That night, Jamie woke to find the word cat scrawled dozens of times across the kitchen walls. The house had been ransacked again, drawers overturned, and a giant footprint pressed into the dust on the floor, too large to belong to anyone in the family. The haunting grew violent. Objects moved, doors slammed, and the girls began locking themselves in their rooms, refusing to come out. Then came the night Marie was home alone. The television flickered on and off before the remote flew across the room. The rocking chair began to move on its own, as if someone invisible had sat down. Pictures fell from the walls in rapid succession. Trembling, she grabbed her camera and snapped photos of glowing orbs floating through the air. When her parents arrived, the house was in chaos again. Even Matt, the skeptic, fell silent when he saw the photos. Days later, Jamie faced the entity herself. Home alone, she heard pounding on her bedroom door, furious, rhythmic. She filmed the sound, whispering in terror. Whenever she reached for the doorknob, the pounding stopped, only to resume when she stepped back. Then came the smell of smoke. She opened the door to find toilet paper laid out like a fuse and a flaming pan in the hall. The fire was spreading. Jamie smothered it and fled outside, collapsing on the steps until her family returned. That was the end. They abandoned the sanctuary, bankrupt but alive. In the months that followed, every neighboring house on their street was vacated, each owner leaving without explanation. The house still stands empty today, a shell of peace turned inside out, waiting for its next family to move in and learn what Susan already knows. Some homes remember the dead too well to let the living stay. In 2010, a group of 911 dispatchers in Reno, Nevada, began receiving calls unlike anything they'd ever encountered. The voice on the other end belonged to an elderly woman named Martha, who lived about 20 miles east of the city. Her husband had recently passed away, and she now lived alone in their small house on the outskirts of the desert. At first, the calls were harmless, almost sad in their confusion. "Can you please come boil some water for me?" she'd ask, "or could you turn up the heat? It's so cold tonight." The dispatchers patiently reminded her that 911 was for emergencies, not household help. Martha would apologize, embarrassed, and hang up. Still, she called back 2 or 3 times a week, her trembling voice echoing through the speakers of the dispatch center. The calls continued for months, and the dispatchers began to recognize her number immediately. Her voice had become a strange fixture of their shifts, a lonely ghost drifting through static. But then one night, the tone of her calls changed. "John," she whispered, voice quivering. "John, where are you?" The dispatcher froze. John was her late husband. "Ma'am, this is 911. Are you trying to reach your husband?" But Martha didn't respond. "John, come home," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, I need you." The dispatcher ended the call gently, assuming confusion or grief had overtaken her. Still, the sound of her desperation lingered long after the line went dead. Weeks passed, and Martha's calls became more frantic. "He's here," she would say breathlessly. "He's in the house." Then, click, the line would cut out. The dispatchers debated sending someone out, but each time she'd call back calm and lucid, insisting she was fine. Then came the final call. The dispatcher picked up to hear her sobbing, "John, please come home. Help me." Her panic was raw and real. This time they sent officers to the house immediately. When first responders arrived, The front door was unlocked. The air inside was bitterly cold. They called out for Martha, but no one answered. Upstairs in the bedroom, they found her lying peacefully in bed. She had been dead for hours. Rigor mortis had already set in. When the officers radioed dispatch, they mentioned that she had clearly been dead long before the 911 call was placed. But the dispatcher, hearing this, swore it was impossible. "I spoke to her," she insisted. "I know her voice." She wasn't mistaken. The call had come from her number, and the voice was unmistakably hers. They tried to rationalize it. Maybe the cold temperature had slowed the onset of rigor mortis. Maybe she died just after calling. But in the back of every responder's mind was the same unspoken question. How could she have called after she was gone? A few days later, another call came through. The address flashed across the dispatcher's screen. Martha's house. She stared at it, stunned, then answered. "Martha," she said. "John, please," came the trembling reply. "Help me. I'm scared." The dispatcher's hand went cold. The woman's voice was clear, human, alive. Yet Martha had been buried for nearly a week. Police raced to the property, but the house was empty. The door hung open. Inside, silence. No phone connected, no power. Nothing but the faint smell of dust and cold air. Over the next few months, the calls continued. Each time, the same desperate plea for her husband. Each time, dispatchers sent officers to the vacant lot. Because how could they ignore a call for help, even from the dead? Eventually, the house burned down after a suspected break-in. The property was reduced to ash, the phone line physically disconnected. Yet still the calls came. Sometimes once a week, sometimes twice. The number appeared on their system exactly as before, even though phone records showed that her line had been terminated. Technicians from the phone company investigated. They confirmed the line had been cut cleanly and all connections removed. No wires crossed. No technical glitch. "It's impossible," they said. "There's no signal coming from that property." One theory suggested that a digital echo of her voice, some kind of recording, was looping through the system. But that didn't explain why every call was different. Her tone changed, her words shifted, her cries sounded fresh each time. For nearly a year after her death, dispatchers kept receiving those ghostly pleas. Every time they followed procedure, sent responders, and found nothing but an empty patch of land. Then, one morning, as abruptly as they'd begun, the calls stopped. No more signals, no more voices. Today, the 911 center in Reno still keeps a file labeled the ghost calls. No one ever figured out how a woman without a phone, a house, or a heartbeat managed to keep calling for her husband. But every dispatcher who worked those nights swears the same thing. It wasn't a recording. It was her. In the quiet town of Amityville, New York, the DeFeo family lived in a stately Dutch colonial house on Ocean Avenue. On the surface, they were ordinary. Parents, children, a life by the water. But in the early hours of November 13th, 1974, that illusion shattered forever. At 1:15 a.m., 23-year-old Ronald Ron DeFeo Jr. rose from his bed in the basement. He took a .35 caliber Marlin rifle and climbed the stairs. His parents were asleep in their room. Without hesitation, he fired 2 rounds into his father's back, then 2 more into his mother. He reloaded calmly, crossed the hall, and entered his brother's bedroom. Mark, 12, and John, 9, shooting each once as they slept. Then he continued upstairs, killing his 13-year-old sister Allison and 18-year-old sister Dawn. In 15 minutes, he wiped out his entire family. When police arrived later that day, Ron confessed immediately. his voice cold and detached. Once I started, he said, I couldn't stop. It went so fast, investigators struggled to understand how 6 people could be shot in their beds without anyone waking or fighting back. Toxicology reports showed no drugs or sedatives in their systems. Yet every body lay face down, undisturbed, as if they'd been paralyzed by something unseen. The rifle he used was deafening. Neighbors heard no gunshots, no screams. The mystery deepened when Ron told detectives about the voice that had guided him. It started whispering, he said, "Catch them. Kill them." He described a dark figure emerging from the shadows of the basement, a shape that approached him, its mouth moving though no words came out. Then close to his ear, it hissed, "Catch them. Kill them." Ron said he felt something take hold of his body. His hands, no longer his own, reached for the rifle. He walked upstairs, his mind screaming to stop, but his body obeying the command. When he finished, he said, the voice was gone. His defense argued demonic possession. The prosecution called it madness. The jury chose neither. Ron was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. Yet even behind bars, he continued to claim that something evil had been inside the house that night. A year later, George and Kathy Lutz purchased the home at a bargain price. They moved in with their 3 children, aware of its gruesome past, but hopeful that love and faith would cleanse it. Within days, the atmosphere changed. Doors slammed by themselves. Strange cold spots formed in certain rooms. The children complained of unseen voices whispering their names. One night, George awoke at 3:15 a.m., the exact time of the murders, feeling drawn to the boathouse, as if something outside was calling him. 28 days after moving in, the Lutz family fled in terror, leaving all their belongings behind. Their story spread quickly, capturing the attention of famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The couple spent several nights inside the house, conducting seances and taking photographs. Lorraine reported a suffocating sense of evil, claiming she felt the presence of multiple spirits. During one of their investigations, a camera captured a single chilling image, the ghostly figure of a young boy peering from the second-floor hallway. No children were in the house at the time. The photograph became one of the most famous paranormal images ever taken. Lorraine later insisted it showed the spirit of John DeFeo, the murdered 9-year-old. To her, the house was not just haunted, it was cursed, steeped in something ancient and malevolent that had consumed the DeFeos and then reached for the Lutz family next. Over the decades, skeptics have called the Amityville haunting a hoax, a publicity stunt born from tragedy. But even today, no one can fully explain how 6 people died without a struggle, why the neighbors heard nothing, or how the boy in the photograph appeared. The house still stands at 112 Ocean Avenue, remodeled and renamed, but its legacy remains. Locals say that sometimes in the early morning hours of November 13th, the windows flicker with faint light, and a voice drifts from the basement, the same voice that once whispered to Ron DeFeo, "Catch them. Kill them."